The morning in Centralia looks completely ordinary. There are no people, no passing cars, no obvious signs of danger. Just an old road, cracked and broken, half buried, as if someone deliberately tried to erase it from the map. If you stand still long enough, you start to notice something strange. The snow never settles on the ground. From thin cracks in the earth, steam seeps out slowly, steadily, as if the ground itself is breathing. There are no flames, but the ground is warm. And in the air lingers a faint sulfur smell, the kind former residents say is most terrifying, not when you first notice it, but when you stop noticing it at all. Because the truth is, this entire town is sitting on a fire. A fire that has been burning for more than 60 years and has never gone out. So how did a normal American town end up being destroyed from beneath the surface, without almost anyone realizing it until it was too late? If you want to understand what happened here, why the fire couldn't be stopped, and what ultimately caused an entire community to disappear, stay with me until the end of this video. And if you're drawn to true stories where calm surfaces hide unimaginable disasters, don't forget to like and subscribe so you won't miss what comes next. Centralia before the disaster, 1800s to 1950s. By the late 19th century, Centralia was not a forgotten town. It sat at the very center of Pennsylvania's coal region, where every road, every decision, and every family revolved around a single thing: coal. The coal found here was different from most of the rest of the United States. It was anthracite, hard coal, high in energy, burning hotter, burning slower, and extremely difficult to extinguish. Those qualities turned Centralia into a destination, and those same qualities would later push everything beyond control. The town was first known as Bull's Head, then Centerville, before being officially incorporated as Centralia in 1866. 4 years earlier, in 1862, the Centralia Colliery had opened. From that moment on, the town grew according to a clear and predictable order. Miners' houses were built close together. Churches, taverns, and general stores appeared exactly where people needed them. Life was not easy. Mine accidents were common, but the work was steady, and at that time, steady work was enough to build an entire life. Many families worked in the mines for 2, sometimes 3 generations. Sons grew up and went underground. Their sons followed. No one believed they were living on something dangerous. Coal was the foundation of the town, the reason Centralia existed. That certainty began to erode after World War II. By the 1950s, coal was losing its dominance. Oil and natural gas were cheaper, more flexible, and quickly replaced it. The mines began to close, jobs disappeared, families moved away. Below the surface, a vast network of mine tunnels was left behind. Hundreds of kilometers of passages were no longer monitored, no longer sealed properly, no longer anyone's responsibility. But the coal remained, intact, unremoved. At the time, no one saw this as a problem. The abandoned mines were viewed simply as remnants of a declining industry. Not dangerous, not urgent, not something that demanded immediate action. And that belief, that everything important had been left safely in the past, was what carried Centralia one step closer to a disaster no one could yet see. So what happens when a mine is abandoned, but still full of fuel? 1962, an ordinary mistake. The fire slips underground. By 1962, Centralia was no longer at its peak. Many families had already left, but people still lived there. Schools were still open. Church services were still held. Life continued on the momentum of a place that had never imagined it was in danger. That May, Centralia was preparing for Memorial Day. Like many small towns, it faced a familiar problem: waste. Local officials had recently tightened regulations against illegal dumping throughout the town. To deal with it, they chose a solution that seemed reasonable at the time: using an abandoned open-pit mine on the edge of town as a centralized landfill. It was a large pit, long unused, no longer valuable for mining, no longer serving any purpose. In the minds of those making the decision, it was simply an empty space. As the landfill began to fill, the town council needed a quick and inexpensive solution. They chose a method commonly used in rural towns at the time: burning the trash. On May 27, 1962, firefighters were called in. They ignited the pile. The fire burned on the surface. When the visible flames died down, water was sprayed to extinguish it. There were no incidents, no warnings. They left, believing the job was finished. 2 days later, the fire returned. Fire crews came back a second time. This time, bulldozers were used to stir the trash so it could burn more thoroughly from within. Afterward, water was sprayed again. The surface fire disappeared. But then something else appeared. A foul smell began to spread from the landfill. It was not the usual odor of burning trash. It lingered. It did not fade after a few hours, but persisted for days. When the area was examined more closely, something previously unnoticed was discovered. Along the northern wall of the landfill was a hole roughly 15 feet deep, hidden beneath layers of garbage and soil. That hole did not end in the earth. It opened directly into an abandoned network of mine tunnels beneath Centralia. It was a moment no one in town immediately recognized for what it was. But in reality, from that instant forward, the fire was no longer in the landfill. It had found what it needed: anthracite coal. The fire moved down into the old tunnels. It traveled through cracks that had existed for decades, and it began to burn in a space no one controlled anymore. In the years that followed, the exact cause of the fire remained a subject of debate. Some believed the 1962 trash burn was the true ignition point. Others argued that an older mine fire, never fully extinguished, had been reawakened. But regardless of which explanation is correct, the outcome did not change. From that point on, the fire was no longer somewhere people could see. It was inside the coal. And once that happened, every attempt to control it would have to begin in the dark. So when fire disappears underground, can anyone truly stop it? Fighting the fire in the dark, 1962 to 1980. After the fire disappeared underground, Centralia did not immediately panic. In the minds of local officials and residents at the time, this was still a technical problem, something that could be managed. The earliest efforts focused on what could be seen. Earth was dug up. Suspected areas were sealed off. The objective was simple: isolate the fire before it spread any further. The problem was that no one knew exactly where the fire was. As signs emerged that it was still moving, larger measures were put in place. Deep trenches were dug in an attempt to cut off the fire's path. In theory, if there was no coal ahead of it, the fire would starve and die. In practice, the opposite happened. The fire spread faster than the trenches could be completed. By the time a barrier was finished, the fire had already slipped past it underground. Next came a method known as flushing. Engineers drilled boreholes deep into the earth. Water, sand, slurry, and gravel were pumped down in an attempt to seal voids and cut off oxygen. But anthracite coal burned at higher temperatures than expected. Much of the injected material was dried out or incinerated before it ever reached the core of the fire. The boreholes themselves, instead of stopping the fire, became new pathways for air. Centralia was not dealing with a single blaze. It was dealing with an entire mining system. Tunnels, vertical shafts, sloped passages, and fractures formed a natural ventilation network. No fans were required. No machinery was needed. oxygen found its own way down. As the initial strategies failed, more extreme proposals began to surface. Some argued the mines should be flooded completely. Others suggested excavating the entire burning area. These plans were studied, they were costed, and they were quickly dismissed. A full-scale excavation was estimated to cost around $600 million, far beyond the means of the town and even the state. Gradually, the options narrowed. Not because the situation had improved, but because no remaining solution was technically or financially viable. Over the following years, firefighting efforts slowed. Government attention shifted elsewhere. The fire was still there, but no longer visible at the surface. For most residents of Centralia, this led to a quiet assumption. The problem was under control. Life went on. Homes were still occupied. Children continued to play on familiar streets. No one knew exactly where the fire was moving. And more importantly, no one realized that by this point, control was no longer in human hands. So how dangerous is a fire that everyone believes is under control? February 14, 1981, when the ground opened. On the morning of February 14, 1981, Centralia woke up like any other day. The air was cold. A thin layer of snow covered the ground. Nothing suggested that this would be a day unlike the rest. At the same time, a group of state officials arrived in town to survey the mine fire that had been smoldering beneath Centralia for years. The inspection was routine. There were no roadblocks, no emergency warnings. For most residents, it was just another checkup. Todd, 12 years old, was asked by his mother to see what was going on after government vehicles were spotted near the neighborhood. It wasn't a reckless decision. Todd wasn't trespassing. He was walking along familiar ground, places where children played every day. As he moved along, Todd noticed something small but unusual. A patch of ground near an old tree was free of snow. Thin smoke drifted upward from the earth. It wasn't dramatic. It didn't draw attention. Todd took one more step. The ground collapsed instantly. He dropped straight into a hole that opened beneath his feet. Below him was hot, thick mud. Dense smoke surged upward from underground. The air was filled with carbon monoxide, colorless, odorless, and lethal within minutes. Todd tried to struggle, but every movement caused the surrounding soil to give way. He sank deeper until the mud reached his chest. From below came a steady rushing sound. Air was being pulled into the burning mine system, functioning like a massive ventilation shaft. With every surge of air, the ground weakened further. In that moment, Todd managed to grab onto an exposed tree root at the edge of the hole. It was the only thing keeping him from disappearing entirely. Eric, Todd's cousin, heard the screams and ran toward the sound. By the time he reached the spot, Todd was no longer standing on solid ground. Only smoke rose from the opening. Eric reached down, grabbed hold of Todd, and pulled with everything he had. Moments later, the boy was dragged free, covered in hot mud, shaken but alive. Later analysis showed that if Todd had remained in the hole for just a few more minutes, the concentration of carbon monoxide would have been fatal. The collapse occurred at the site of an old mine shaft, poorly filled decades earlier. The fire below had heated and hollowed the earth above it, until a single step was enough to cause it to give way. This was the first moment Centralia could no longer treat the fire as something happening somewhere underground. The danger had reached the surface, and it had chosen a child. If the ground can open anywhere, who is actually safe? Division, relocation, the sentencing of a town, 1981 to 1992. After the incident on February 14, 1981, Centralia could no longer return to what it once was. The fire was no longer a technical problem buried deep underground. It had entered everyday life and had nearly taken the life of a child. Media attention followed quickly. State and federal agencies became directly involved. Centralia turned into a political flashpoint where every decision was made under public scrutiny. Widespread testing for toxic gases began. The results were inconsistent. Some homes showed dangerous levels of carbon monoxide and other gases. Yet just a few streets away, measurements fell within acceptable limits. This inconsistency created a dangerous gap, not clear enough to justify an immediate, full evacuation, but not safe enough to declare the town livable. During this period, many residents began reporting unexplained symptoms, persistent headaches, strange odors inside their homes, basements that felt unnaturally warm, even in winter. Not everyone experienced these problems, and that difference fractured the community. One group believed the danger was real and growing. They wanted to leave and demanded relocation assistance and decisive government action. The other group believed the threat was exaggerated. They pointed to normal test results, years of living without incident, and the belief that if real danger existed, it would have been addressed long ago. Disagreements soon escalated beyond debate. Rumors spread. Trust between neighbors collapsed. There were acts of vandalism. Long-standing relationships ended. A town once held together by mining work and shared routines began tearing itself apart from within. In 1984, under mounting pressure, the U.S. Congress approved a $42 million aid package to relocate Centralia's residents. It was not a forced evacuation. It was a choice. For many families, that choice meant leaving homes they had lived in their entire lives. But for most, it was the only option left. Relocation unfolded over the following years. Homes were sealed and then demolished. The school closed. The post office shut down. Roads led to empty foundations. By the early 1990s, Centralia was no longer a functioning town. In 1992, the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania invoked eminent domain, seizing the remaining properties. Residents who refused to leave were granted life estates, the right to live there until death, but without the ability to transfer ownership or pass property on to the next generation. Legally, Centralia was not erased overnight, but from that moment on, the town had no future. The fire continued to burn underground. Above ground, an entire community had been sentenced to disappear, not by a single decision, but by a chain of reasonable choices made one after another until no choices remained. Today, Centralia is barely a town at all. Only a handful of residents remain, scattered among dead-end roads, empty foundations, and street signs that no longer lead anywhere. There is no plan to rebuild. There is no timeline for extinguishing the fire. Beneath the ground, it continues to burn, slowly, quietly, and according to current estimates, it may keep going for hundreds of years. Centralia did not collapse in a single moment. It drifted out of its familiar reality step by step over the course of decades. Each stage had its reasons. Each decision seemed reasonable at the time it was made. And in hindsight, there is no single point that can easily be called the end. What remains is not only a fire, but a legal void. A community that no longer has the right to continue itself through future generations. Those allowed to stay may live out their lives here, but they cannot pass the town on to anyone else. Centralia, then, has not vanished completely. It exists as a trace, in official records, on maps, in the memories of those who once called it home, and in the fire that is still burning beneath it. Centralia wasn't destroyed by one moment, but by decades of believing tomorrow would fix what today ignored. And the final question is not just about Centralia. When a danger unfolds slowly enough, quietly enough, and long enough, at what point do people finally realize they no longer control it? If you appreciate carefully told true stories like this one, please like the video, subscribe to the channel, and leave a comment with your thoughts. Thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.